The air in the cantina was thick with smoke and the smell of alien drinks. Zektar sat alone at a corner table, his forearms wrapped around a large metal cup. His dark skin showed old battle scars that glowed with a faint blue light. The scars told stories of pain and war that most beings would never understand. 3 young Vorthic soldiers walked over to his table. Their armor was clean and bright, not a single mark on it. They had never seen real battle. Their eyes were full of excitement and foolish bravery. "Old warrior," said the tallest one, his voice loud and proud. "Tell us about the war. Tell us about the humans." Zektar looked up at them with his large compound eyes. Each eye held 1,000 tiny mirrors that reflected the dim light of the cantina. He had seen too much death, too much blood. The young soldiers reminded him of himself long ago, when he thought war was about glory and honor. "Humans?" Zektar's voice was rough and quiet. "You want to know about humans?" The 3 soldiers sat down without asking. They leaned forward like children waiting for an exciting story. The first soldier, Kexival, had bright yellow markings on his face that showed he came from a warrior family. The second one, Mordek, wore medals that his father had earned in smaller wars. The third, Yulten, was the youngest and most eager. "Tell us how weak they are," Kexival said with a laugh. "Tell us how easy it will be to crush them." Zektar. Mandibles clicked together slowly. It was not a sound of joy. It was the sound an old warrior makes when he remembers horror. "Weak?" Zektar repeated the word like it tasted bad. "You think humans are weak?" "Of course," Mordek said, hitting the table with his fist. "Our ships are bigger. Our weapons are stronger. Our soldiers are tougher. The humans are just soft flesh bags that walk on 2 legs. They live on only one world," Yulton added. "We control 100 star systems. They cannot even travel faster than light without our old technology." Zektar took a long drink from his cup. The liquid burned as it went down his throat. He closed his eyes and saw flashes of memory. Ships burning in space, bodies floating in the dark. The screams of his brothers as they died. "I was like you once," Zektar said slowly. "I thought the same things. I believed the same lies." The 3 young soldiers looked at each other with confusion. Lies? What lies could there be about humans? 20 years ago, Zektar continued, the High Command gave us our orders. Invade the Sol system. Take their home world. Make them our slaves. It was supposed to be easy. It was supposed to take 2 weeks. The old warrior stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, ships of many different races came and went from the space station. But he was not looking at the ships. He was looking into the past. "I was commander of the 3rd Strike Force," he said. 500 ships, 50,000 warriors. We were proud. We were strong. We were ready to add another victory to our long history. He turned back to face the young soldiers. His scars were glowing brighter now, responding to his emotions. The humans had maybe 100 ships in their entire fleet. Small ships. Slow ships. Their weapons were simple. Their armor was thin. Our scouts laughed when they saw them. Our leaders called it target practice. Kexival leaned back in his chair. "So what happened? Did you win too quickly? Did they surrender before you even fought?" Zektar sat back down. His 4 hands were shaking slightly. Even after all these years, the memories still made him afraid. We jumped into their system expecting to find them running away. Instead, we found them waiting for us. Every human ship was in formation. Every weapon was ready. They knew we were coming. "Of course they knew," Mordek said. "Fear makes beings do strange things. They were probably hoping to make a brave last stand before they died." "That is what we thought too," Zektar said. We sent them the usual message. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Fight us, and we will destroy you completely. It was the same message we had sent to 1,000 other species. What did they say? Yulton asked. Ze Kata's voice became very quiet. They said no. The 3 young soldiers looked confused. Every species said no at first. That was normal. That was expected. But that was not the strange part, Zektar continued. The strange part was how they said it. No fear, no begging, no threats. Just a simple message from their leader. A human named Admiral Jake Morrison. He said, "We refuse your offer. If you want our world, you will have to take it from our cold, dead hands." The old warrior paused to drink again. His scars were pulsing. Faster now. We attacked first. Of course we did. We had more ships. We had better weapons. But something was wrong from the very beginning. Their ships did not try to run away. They did not try to hide. They came straight at us. Well, that was stupid, Kexival said. That is what we thought. Zektar agreed. But then we learned something. About humans that no other species had ever taught us. They do not fight to win. They fight to make sure their enemy loses, even if it costs them everything. The 3 young soldiers sat in silence. They did not understand what that meant. Not yet. Their first ship, a small vessel called the U-East Defender, rammed straight into our flagship. The human captain, a female named Lisa Brooks, flew her ship right into our command center. She killed herself and 300 of my warriors in one. Move. Zektar's voice was barely a whisper now. And as she died, she was laughing. The cantina seemed to grow quieter. Other aliens at nearby tables had stopped talking. They were listening to the old warrior's story. That was when I knew, Zektar said. That was when I understood that we were not fighting a normal enemy. We were fighting something that had never existed before in the galaxy. We were fighting a species that would rather die than lose. He looked at each of the young soldiers in turn. Do you still think humans are weak? The 3 young soldiers sat frozen in their chairs. They had never heard of an enemy that would kill themselves just to hurt their attackers. In their minds, war was about winning glory and taking prizes. The idea of dying on purpose made no sense to them. Tell us more, Yulton said quietly. His voice was not as loud as before. Zektar nodded slowly. He knew they needed to hear the full truth. Someone had to remember what really happened in the human war. Someone had to make sure it never happened again. After the first ship rammed us, we thought it was just one crazy human. We were wrong. It was their plan from the beginning. Every human ship was ready to die. Every human crew was ready to sacrifice themselves. The old warrior's 4 hands moved in the air as he spoke, painting pictures of the battle in space. Their second ship, commanded by Captain Rick Thompson, used a different trick. Instead of ramming us, he flew his ship into our formation and then exploded his engines. The blast took out 6 of our cruisers. Before he died, he sent a message to the other human ships. He gave them the weak points in our armor that he had discovered. Mordick shook his head. That is not how war works. Soldiers are supposed to try to live. They are supposed to retreat when they are losing. That is what we thought too, Zektar said. But humans think differently. They believe that information is more valuable than life. Every human death taught the others something new. Every sacrifice made the next attack stronger. The old warrior paused to look around the cantina. Aliens from many different species were drinking and laughing. None of them had ever fought humans. None of them knew what it was like to face an enemy that learned from every loss. The space battle lasted 3 days. We lost 40 ships. They lost all of theirs. By the rules of war, we had won. But it did not feel like victory. Every human ship had hurt us before dying. Every human crew had sent information to their planet below. When we finally reached their world, they knew everything about our weapons, our tactics, our weaknesses. Kexaval leaned forward. But you still had 40 ships left. They had nothing. The planet was defenseless. We thought so too, Zektar said with a bitter laugh. We prepared for a simple invasion. Land our troops, take their cities, capture their leaders. It should have been easy. Other species always surrender when their space fleet is destroyed. The old warrior's scars began to glow brighter. The memories were getting worse now. The space battle had been terrible, but the ground war had been pure horror. We chose to land near their biggest city, a place called New York. 5,000 of our best warriors, heavy weapons, battle armor. We expected to face their military and maybe some local police. Instead, we found something that still gives me nightmares. He took another drink, trying to wash away the taste of fear in his mouth. The humans had turned their entire city into a weapon. Every building was a fortress. Every street was a trap. Every citizen was a soldier. When our ships landed, we were surrounded by millions of enemies, and we did not even know it. Yulden's eyes were wide. Millions? But humans are not warriors. They are soft. They are weak. That is what we thought, Zektar repeated. We learned that humans are only soft. On the outside. Inside, they are made of something harder than our strongest armor. They are made of pure, stubborn anger. The old warrior stood up again and walked to the window. He could see his reflection in the glass, and for a moment he looked like the young soldier he had been 20 years ago. The first human we met was an old male, maybe 60 years old, gray hair, small body, wearing simple clothes. He was standing in the middle of the street, alone. Our squad leader laughed and told him to surrender. The old human smiled and pressed a button. Zektar's voice became very quiet. The entire building behind him exploded. The old human died, but he took 20 of our warriors with him. As he died, he was still smiling. The 3 young soldiers said nothing. They were beginning to understand that this was not a normal war story. That was when we knew we were in trouble. This was not a human soldier. This was not a human warrior. This was just an old man who sold books for a living. But he had spent 3 days preparing to kill us. He had turned his own home into a bomb. Zektar returned to his seat. His 4 hands were shaking harder now. We moved deeper into the city. Every block was a battle. Every building was a fortress. Humans fought from windows, from rooftops, from underground tunnels. They used their own vehicles as weapons. They used their own buildings as traps. They used their own bodies as shields to protect their children, while the children threw bombs at us. Mordic's voice was barely a whisper. Children? Human children fought you? A human child with a grenade is just as dangerous as a human adult. With a grenade, Zektar said. Maybe more dangerous, because the child has nothing to lose. We found young humans, some as small as 12 years old, who had been trained to use explosives. They would run at our warriors, smiling and laughing, and then blow themselves up. The old warriors' scars were pulsing so fast now that they looked like flashing lights. But the worst part was not the children. The worst part was the adults. We captured a human female named Dr. Amy Carter. She was a scientist, not a soldier. We thought she would give us information about their defenses. Instead, she told us something that made my blood freeze. He paused for a long moment, remembering. She said, "You think you are fighting our military. You are wrong. You are fighting our entire species. Every human on this planet is ready to die to stop you. And when we are all dead, we will have taught the next planet exactly how to kill you." The cantina was completely quiet now. Even the aliens at other tables had stopped talking to listen. That was when I understood, Zektar said. We were not fighting a war. We were fighting something much worse. We were fighting a species that had decided we were not allowed to exist. The three young soldiers sat in complete silence. They stared at Zektar with new eyes. This was not the glorious war story they had expected to hear. This was something else entirely. Something that made their blood run cold. What happened next? Kexival asked, though his voice showed he was not sure he wanted to know. Zektar finished his drink and set the cup down hard on the table. The metal made a loud clang that echoed through the quiet cantina. We tried to retreat from the city, but the humans would not let us go. They followed us. They hunted us. They turned the entire planet into a trap, and we were the prey. The old warrior's scars were now glowing so bright that other aliens in the cantina were looking at him with concern. But he did not notice. He was lost in his memories. We called for help from our fleet in orbit. They tried to send down more troops, but the humans had learned how to shoot down our ships. They were using our own weapons against us. Weapons they had captured from our dead warriors. Mordic shook his head. That is impossible. Our weapons are coded to our biology. Only Porthic hands can fire them. The humans did not use their hands, Zektar said with a bitter laugh. They cut off the hands of our dead warriors and attached them to their weapons. They turned our own bodies into tools. The young soldiers felt sick. This was not honorable. Warfare. This was something twisted and wrong. But that was not the worst part, Zektar continued. The worst part was what they did to our prisoners. They did not torture us. They did not kill us. They studied us. He stood up and began pacing around the table. His forearms moved nervously as he spoke. They had built a research facility in the ruins of their city, a place where their scientists could work safely. It was led by a human named Dr. Helen Foster. She was small, quiet, and polite. She offered us food and medical care. She treated our wounds and made us comfortable. Yultan looked confused. That sounds merciful. Why was it terrible? Because while she was being kind to us, she was also cutting us open to see how we worked. She was studying our biology, our psychology, our technology. Every day, she learned something new about how to kill us. Zektar's voice became very quiet. She would sit beside our beds and ask us questions, simple questions, about our families, our homes, our fears. She spoke to us like a friend, and then she would write down everything we said in her little book. The old warrior stopped pacing and looked directly at the three young soldiers. Do you know what she was doing? She was building a map of our minds. She was learning how we think, how we feel, how we react. She was turning our own thoughts into weapons against us. The cantina seemed to grow colder. Other aliens were now openly listening to the story, their faces filled with horror. Dr. Foster shared her research with every human military unit on the planet. Within days, they knew exactly how to frighten us, how to confuse us, how to make mistakes. They knew which sounds would make us panic. They knew which colors would make us angry. They knew which smells would make us sick. Kexival's voice was barely a whisper. How do you know all this? Because I was one of her prisoners, Zektar said. I spent 2 weeks in that facility. 2 weeks of kind words and gentle care while she learned everything there was to know about me. About us. He sat back down and put his 4 hands on the table. The young soldiers could see that his claws were shaking. When I finally escaped, I found that the war had changed completely. The humans were no longer just defending their city. They were attacking us. They were using everything Dr. Foster had learned to turn us against each other. Mordic leaned forward. What do you mean? They broadcast sounds that made us feel afraid. They used lights that made us dizzy. They released smells that reminded us of death. They had turned our own senses into their weapons. Zektar's scars were pulsing faster now. But the worst thing was the psychological warfare. They knew exactly what to say to make us doubt ourselves. They knew exactly what to do to make us lose hope. The old warrior paused and looked around the cantina. He could see that everyone was listening now. Aliens from a dozen different species were hanging on his every word. They would capture our communications and play them back to us. But they would change small details. They would make it sound like our commanders were abandoning us. They would make it sound like our families had forgotten us. They would make it sound like our cause was hopeless. Ultin's eyes were wide with fear. Did it work? It worked perfectly, Zektar said. Within a month, half of our forces had deserted. The other half were too afraid to fight effectively. The humans had broken our army without firing a shot. He picked up his empty cup and stared into it. And then they did something that still confuses me to this day. They offered us a way out. The three young soldiers looked at each other. This was not making sense. If the humans were winning, why would they offer mercy? A human general named Carol Johnson sent a message to our fleet. She said that if we left their system immediately, they would let us go. No more fighting, no more dying. Just leave and never come back. Mordic frowned. That sounds like a trap. That is what we thought too, Zektar agreed. But we were wrong. It was not a trap. It was something much more frightening. It was a warning. The old warrior's voice became very serious. General Johnson told us that the humans had learned everything they needed to know about fighting us. They had studied our technology, our tactics, our weaknesses. They had turned our own prisoners into teachers. He looked at each of the young soldiers in turn. She said that if we stayed, they would not just defeat us. They would follow us back to our home worlds. They would bring the war to our families. They would turn our own people against us, just like they had turned us against each other. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped serving drinks to listen. And then General Johnson said something that still gives me nightmares. She said, "We have learned that the best way to win a war is to make sure it never happens again. If you leave now, you will live. If you stay, your species will become extinct." Zektar set down his cup and looked at the three young soldiers. We left. We ran away like cowards, and we were grateful to be alive. The three young soldiers thought the story was over. They expected Zektar to tell them about the retreat, about going home, about the end of the war. But the old warrior was not finished. His scars were still glowing, and his eyes held a darkness that spoke of even worse memories. "You think we ran away, and that was the end?" Zektar asked. His voice was heavy with pain. "You think the humans just let us go home and forget about the war?" Kexival nodded slowly. "You said they offered you mercy. You said they let you leave." "They did let us leave their system," Zektar said. "But they did not let us forget. They followed us." The old warrior stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, the space station was busy with ships from many worlds, all trading peacefully. But Zektar remembered a time when space was full of war and death. 2 months after we retreated, human ships appeared in our border systems. Not invasion. Fleets, not massive armies. Just small groups of ships with crews of maybe 10 or 20 humans each. Mordek looked confused. What could such small forces do against our home defense fleets? "Everything," Zektar said simply. "They had learned to fight us better than we knew how to fight ourselves." The old warrior turned back to face the young soldiers. His forearms moved as he spoke, showing the battles in his mind. The first attack came at our supply depot near Kepler 7. Commander Steve Parker led a team of only 15 humans. They destroyed our entire supply network with one carefully planned strike. They did not use big weapons or massive explosions. They used our own security systems against us. Yulton shook his head. How is that possible? They had studied our computer systems while they were prisoners on Earth. They knew our security codes, our access protocols, our system weaknesses. They walked into our most secure facilities like they owned them. Zektar sat back down, his movements heavy with the weight of memory. But the worst part was not that they destroyed our supplies. The worst part was what they did with the information. They discovered our military plans, our troop movements, our strategic targets. They learned everything about our entire military structure. The old warrior paused to signal for another drink. When it arrived, he held it but did not drink. His hands needed something to hold while he told the rest of the story. Within a week, every Vorthik military base in 3 sectors received the same message. It was from a human named Major Kate Williams. She told us exactly when and where her teams would strike next. She gave us the names of the bases they would attack, the defenses they would destroy, the commanders they would target. The 3 young soldiers looked at each other with confusion. Why would an enemy tell you their plans? We thought it was a trick, Zektar continued. We thought they were lying to make us move our forces to the wrong places. So we ignored the warnings and kept our defenses where they were. He finally took a sip of his drink, but it seemed to taste bitter in his mouth. Major Williams did exactly what she promised. Every attack happened exactly when and where she said it would. Every target was destroyed exactly as she described. Our commanders realized that the humans were not trying to trick us. They were showing us how helpless we were. Mordic's voice was very quiet. They told you their plans because they knew you could not stop them anyway. Yes, Zektar said. They wanted us to understand that they could defeat us even when we knew they were coming. They wanted us to realize that there was no defense against them. The old warrior's scars were pulsing faster now. The memories were getting to the worst part. The breaking point came at the Battle of Proxima Station. Admiral Tony Mitchell led a fleet of only 30 human ships against our main defensive position. We had 200 ships, orbital weapons platforms, and 50,000 warriors. He set down his drink and looked directly at the 3 young soldiers. The humans did not try to win that battle. They tried to teach us a lesson. Every human ship that was destroyed sent a message to our fleet. Every human death gave information to the ships that were still fighting. Kexivo leaned forward. What kind of information? The location of our command centers, the frequency of our communications, the weak points in our armor, the fears of our crews. Each human ship that died made the remaining ships more dangerous. Zektar's voice became very quiet. But the most terrible thing was what they did when they knew they were going to lose. The human ships that were too damaged to fight did not retreat. They did not surrender. They sent out a signal that told every human in the galaxy exactly how to defeat us. The old warrior paused, remembering the horror of that moment. Admiral Mitchell sent a message to every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost in known space. The message contained detailed plans for destroying Vorthik fleets, captured records of our military communications, and complete psychological profiles of our command structure. Yultan's eyes were wide with fear. He gave away all your secrets? Not just our secrets, Zektar said. He gave away the secrets of every species in the hegemony. The humans had been studying all of us, learning about all of us, preparing to fight all of us. But Cantina was completely silent now. Aliens from many different species were listening with growing horror. And then Admiral Mitchell did something. That still makes me wake up screaming. He broadcast his final message on every frequency, in every language, to every world in the galaxy. Zektar's voice became barely a whisper. He said, "This is humanity's gift to the galaxy. We have learned how to defeat every species that threatens peace. This knowledge is now free for everyone to use. Any species that tries to conquer others will face not just human resistance, but the resistance of every free world in the galaxy." The old warrior looked around the cantina at all the different species sitting together, drinking together, talking together. That was the day the humans turned every species in the galaxy into their allies, not through conquest, not through threats, but by giving away the power to defend themselves. Mordic shook his head in disbelief. They made enemies of everyone by trying to conquer you, but they made friends of everyone by teaching them how to fight. Now you begin to understand, Sektar said. The humans did not just win the war. They ended war itself. They made it impossible for any species to conquer any other species, because everyone now knew how to resist. The old warrior finished his drink and set the cup down gently this time. That was when I learned the most frightening thing about humans. They do not just fight to win. They fight to make sure the fight never happens again. The three young soldiers sat in stunned silence. They had come to hear stories of glorious victory. Instead, they had learned about the most terrifying defeat in galactic history. But Sektar was not finished with his story. The worst part was still to come. The war should have ended there, Sektar said, his voice heavy with memory. We had lost our supply lines, our strategic advantage, our ability to fight effectively. Any reasonable species would have sued for peace. But we were not reasonable. We were proud and stupid. The old warrior's scars were glowing dimly now, like dying embers. The pain in his eyes was deeper than any physical wound. The High Command decided to make one final attack. They gathered every ship, every warrior, every weapon we had left. 5,000 vessels, 1 million soldiers. The largest fleet in Vorthok. History. Keksavil leaned forward despite his fear. What was the target? Earth, Sektar said simply. We were going to destroy the human homeworld completely, turn it into burning rock floating in space. We thought that if we killed them all, the other species would fear us again. He paused to look around the cantina. Aliens from dozens of worlds sat together, talking and laughing. It was hard to imagine that this peaceful scene had almost been destroyed by his people's hatred. The human fleet that met us had only 200 ships. We outnumbered them 25 to 1. Our weapons were still superior. Our armor was still stronger. By every measure of military power, we should have won easily. Mordic's voice was barely a whisper. But you did not win. No, Sektar said. We did not win. But the humans did not win either. They did something that changed everything. They did something that made victory meaningless. The old warrior stood up and walked to the window one last time. Outside, he could see ships from the human fleet docked at the station. Small, simple, vessels that looked harmless. But he knew better. When our fleets met in battle, the humans sent us a message. It was from their leader, Ambassador Pete Harris. He said that they did not want to fight us. He said that they wanted to make peace. Yulton shook his head. But you were attacking their home world. They had to fight. That is what we thought too, Sektar agreed. But Ambassador Harris offered us something that no enemy had ever offered before. He said that if we stopped fighting, they would share their technology with us. Not just some of it. All of it. The three young soldiers looked at each other in confusion. This made no sense. Why would an enemy offer to make you stronger? Ambassador Harris said that the humans had learned something important during the war. They had learned that fighting was waste of life, waste of resources, waste of time. He said that both species would be stronger if they worked together instead of trying to destroy each other. Sektar turned back to face the young soldiers. His face showed the pain of someone who had learned a terrible truth. We laughed at his offer. We thought it was weakness. We thought it was fear. We attacked with everything we had. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. The battle lasted 6 hours. We destroyed half of their fleet. They destroyed most of ours. Millions of warriors died on both sides. The space around Earth became a graveyard of burning ships. He sat back down and put his 4 hands on the table. The young soldiers could see that his claws were no longer shaking. Now they were completely still, as if he had used up all his emotion telling the story. But in the middle of the battle, something happened that I will never understand. The humans stopped fighting. Kexival frowned. They surrendered? No, Zektar said. They did not surrender. They just stopped shooting. Every human ship stopped fighting at the same moment. They sat there in space, waiting for us to destroy them. The old warrior's voice was filled with confusion, even after all these years. We thought it was a trick. We thought they were planning some kind of trap. But they just sat there, defenseless, waiting to die. Mordick leaned forward. What did? You do? We did what any warrior would do. We prepared to finish them off. But then Ambassador Harris sent another message. He said that the humans had decided to prove their point. He said that they would rather die than live in a galaxy where species fought each other instead of helping each other. Zektar's scars were barely glowing now. He said that if we killed them, we would have to live with the knowledge that we had destroyed the only species that ever offered us friendship instead of war. The cantina was completely silent. Even the bartender had stopped working to listen. And then Ambassador Harris said something that broke my heart. He said, "We forgive you for attacking us. We understand that you are afraid. We hope that someday your people will learn what we have learned. We hope that someday you will choose peace over war." Yultan's eyes were wide with shock. What happened next? I was the first to stop shooting, Zektar said quietly. I could not kill beings who forgave me, even as I was trying to destroy them. One by one, the other commanders stopped fighting too. Within minutes, the entire Vorthic fleet was sitting in space, unable to continue the battle. The old warrior looked at each of the young soldiers in turn. That was the day I learned the most important lesson of my life. The humans had not defeated us with superior weapons or better tactics. They had defeated us by being better than us. They had shown us what we could become if we chose to be more than just warriors. He stood up and prepared to leave. The peace treaty was signed a week later, not because we were forced to surrender, but because we finally understood what the humans had been trying to teach us from the beginning. Zektar walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to the 3 young soldiers. You asked me to tell you about the humans. Now you know. They are not weak. They are not soft. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy because they have the power to destroy anyone, but they choose to save everyone instead. The old warrior's scars flickered one last time. That choice is what makes them terrifying. Any species can learn to kill. Only humans have learned to turn enemies into friends. As Zektar left the cantina, the 3 young soldiers sat in silence. They had come looking for stories of war. Instead, they had learned about something much more powerful. They had learned about peace. Outside the window, human ships and Vorthic ships docked side by side, their crews working together to explore the galaxy. The war was over. The lesson had been learned, and the galaxy was a better place because of it. But the young soldiers would never forget the horror in Zektar's eyes when he spoke of fighting the humans. They would never forget the most important lesson he had taught them. The greatest victory is the one where your enemy becomes your friend.